What would an updated tier list to the best Yu-Gi-Oh decks in the game look like?
I don't know.
I know a lot of you guys are preparing for a high-level event, possibly even nationals coming up, and today I'm going to be giving you an updated tier list of the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh using strategies that have all topped high-level events. Big Dog is a testament to the strength of what's happening on in Yu-Gi-Oh right now and gives you insight if you don't want to play the best deck or if you want to know what are the best strategies. Of course, Big Dog, I hope that your day is always going phenomenal. But if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. Let's go ahead and jump on in and start talking about these decks. All right, Big Dog, so the criteria for this tier list is really simple. I gathered as many decks that I could find that topped at least a regional or higher in the last couple of weeks, and today I'll be giving you an update on how powerful these decks are. And of course, like every single tier list, not only will I give you facts and statistics, I'll also will give you my personal experience and a little bit of insight for every single one of these strategies. Let's go ahead and start off with Pearly. Statistically, Pearly has been a strategy that has been flying under the radar. It's pretty good and is able to compete with some of the best decks in the game. A big reason is not only because it can play a ton of hand traps, its field spell prevents you from targeting the special summon Pearly monsters, almost essentially allowing it to combo unscathed because there's so many targeting cards that want to stop Pearly. And let's not forget about the Fat Cat and X-Pearly Noir. Garfield really wish it could be this powerful. I would say that Pearly is one of the best decks in the game. I think that Pearly is one of the better decks that people just don't pay attention to. It's incredibly good at what it does, and in a meta where your deck needs to be one-card starters, this deck essentially does just that. In my last tier list, I ranked Centurion pretty high. Why? Because Centurion still has the Calamity Lock. And while I do think that the Calamity Lock is gimmicky, any given time a strategy can have an option to do that, but also has other options to be able to play, it's typically a successful Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Unfortunately, from my experience, one of the biggest problems with Centurion is losing to those hand traps like Effect Veiler or Infinite Impermanence and not having the correct follow-up. But statistically, this is still a strategy that can compete. What's even cooler about Centurion is that it is confirmed to get more support, making it stronger. And the new support is a tuner monster, which helps fix a lot of Centurion's problem. Overall, though, I absolutely love how many different ways you can play the deck and how versatile it is. Pure Snake Eyes. Why are we still having this conversation? Pure Snake Eyes by most is considered the best deck in the game, still a top competitor. And one of the biggest reasons why Snake Eyes is so good, it's not only is it malleable against hand traps, if you can't finish the deck off, even if you do stop its main combo, it starts all over again and can potentially win the game on turn 3. It's easily one of the most frustrating things about this particular deck is that even when you think you have the strategy dead to rights, it just finds another way to be able to win. A good Snake Eyes player is all the difference from coming from a losing situation to winning just like that, and that's why I think people do not like this deck, or at least playing against it. Blue Underease. I guess the birds of a feather flock together here. One thing I want to emphasize is blowout Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Similar to how Pearly has X-Pearly Noir, how Centurion has Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Calamity, Fluandereeze essentially has a card that can win games outright by itself. Fluandereeze Impin got a lot stronger, seeing that Link monsters are the primary method of being able to play Yu-Gi-Oh! But I think the real thing that makes Fluandereeze crazy is still Harpy's Featherstorm. Being able to turn off all of your opponent's monster effects for the entirety of a turn is crazy. I still think that Fluandereeze is one of the next best decks, and if you guys are a budget player stepping into the game, unfortunately, nah, I ain't doing it. Do not play this deck if you want friends, my brother in Christ. Voiceless Voice. This is me still trying to figure out how are you voiceless with a voice. Voiceless is secretly the third best deck into the format. Strangely enough, 2 of the 3 decks have a hard counter in the game in Dimensional Barrier that can outright shut them out of the game, but somehow they find ways to be successful. And the reason why Voiceless Voice is so successful is because it feels almost immune to hand traps. The same cards that you have to play against other decks in the game, Voiceless Voice can make it seem like a minor inconvenience, and that's one of the more frustrating things that you have to deal with going against this deck. It's still really powerful, and this deck snowballs extremely quick. If it gets online, it's almost over. Cash Tira, baby. Bro, you know me, I'm a young money, cash money dude. So, you know, Juvenile, Wayne, we're talking about Yu-Gi-Oh, aren't we? Cash Tira is statistically one of the best decks in the game, and it surprised me. Even without Kashtira or Rice Heart, this deck is a threat. And as somebody that has played Kashtira for quite some time, it's not Dimension Shifter that makes this deck really good. Ironically, it's the strategies that play Dimension Shifter against you to help you banish your Kashtira cards, but who would have guessed? Cash places an emphasis on the monsters inside of your deck, and being able to banish cards face down, preventing them from ever being accessed again, is crazy good. Cash is simply one of the next best Yu-Gi-Oh strategies. Cash is really good in a format where everyone's playing hand traps, because hand traps don't do enough against the Kashtira monsters. There's still really big chunky boys that can do a lot of damage and then still have their effects online on the next turn. Labyrinth. Labyrinth is another one of those really interesting decks. Labyrinth is incredible against some of the best decks in the entire game. And then you have some matches with Labyrinth that are not desirable. I think if you're rolling with the Mommy Milkers, you have a pretty good chance at winning. This is also another one of the next best decks in the game easily. One of the biggest reasons is because this deck can not only search Dimensional Barrier, players have figured out that Destruction Daruma Cannon is a crazy card. Not only flipping all monsters face down, preventing your opponent from Exceed summoning and Synchro summoning, but can conveniently get rid of links, and for some reason, it's not once per turn. And all I know about the Mommy Milkers is that if I'm ever caught in that labyrinth, I'm not coming out. I'm not smart enough. Runic. Runic has so many different variants, but I decided to wrap them all into one category for right now. So far, we've seen decks like Runic Stun, Runic Plunder, and Runic Sprite all have some type of success. The deck is versatile to always keep somebody on their toes, and it does have pretty decent matchups across the board. I don't think that it's as strong as one of the next best decks or as a top competitor, but I 100% think it can compete. And so far on this tier list, there are two strategies that if you play, people may not like you. So choose wisely when it comes to those decks. Valmonica. Holy crap, this deck actually did top. In case you didn't know, the Valmonica strategy is a pendulum strategy that is based on gaining life points, taking damage, and placing counters. Holy crap, they combined three terrible mechanics together. Their new card in Cellatrice of Valmonica allows you to be able to get a new card from your deck to your hand, and then returns itself to the hand when you have pendulum scales, which should typically be always. I love that Valmonica is going in the correct direction, but I think that this deck is going to need a little bit more time. I'm going to put it in hardest to compete. I think Valmonica getting this high to the highest of top cuts is more of an anomaly than something of a norm. So if you are a Valmonica player that's striving for it, I think you can be successful, but I also think you should dial back your expectations when you're looking at the strategy at the highest levels of events. Now, Horus. Horus can be played in a myriad of different ways too. Horus Stun, Horus Orcus, Horus Centurion, there's so many different Horus decks. At the very worst, and I think it's probably best to judge it at its worst, it is an odd but works type Yu-Gi-Oh deck. The Horus monsters are literally insane. Most people do not read them. All four of them have some amazing abilities when cards are removed off your field, and the Pharaonic Sarcophagus card has a nasty effect when your Horus monsters battles that no one reads. But the problem with this is getting your Horus cards lined up and not bricking. Also, your Imseti getting ashed. Yeah, that sucks. This deck is incredibly good, and if I had to pick a personal favorite right now, ironically, it is the Stun version. Sword Soul got a top in 2024. To all of the Sword Soul players out there, I'm just telling you right now, you a whole thug. Your strategy has not gotten playable support since the deck came out, and you're still doing damage. That is crazy. Imagine if Sword Soul actually got support like how Branded got support. This is one of those strategies that's odd but works. I think Sword Soul coming far in any event is a testament to the player more so of the deck, because we know that it's power crap. Vanquish Soul. Somehow Vanquish Soul always manages to pull out a top at a high level event. This deck is incredibly good at being able to steal wins when people don't see it coming. I think Vanquish Soul is a can compete at the very worst, and probably has been a can compete strategy for the longest. And what I like the most about Vanquish Soul is its usage of cards. Hand traps like Dimension Shifter and Ghost Spell in the matchups that they're not good against, well, they're Dark and Earth targets. And you don't even have to decide to go that route. You can actually go a non-hand trap route and abuse your high level Vanquish Soul monsters to be able to dodge your opponent's hand effects. It's crazy good. This is easily one of the most versatile decks that has not been solved yet. I think hands down, it is a can compete deck. Next, we got Chimera. I see Chimera cooking out there, bro. It's actually a really good Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Nightmare Apprentice really helps the strategy. And the best thing about Chimera, there's multiple ways to play it. Runic, Horus, Pure, Branded, the list goes on. This deck is actually really fun. And recently this deck has been doing a lot. It is incredibly good. I think if it continues, it'll be higher than Can Compete, but for right now, I think the floor is Can Compete. I know that it's doing pretty well, but I want more statistics to be able to back this strategy up so I can put it a little bit higher, so I can say that it's not just a fad. This deck is a legit contender. But Can Compete is still, it's exactly that. Memento. Now, somebody did tell me Memento got a top. I still have not found it. But I'm putting Memento here not only for the Master Duel players that may be wanting to look into the TCG, but also because that might be true. Ironically, I played Memento in Master Duel, and it's a deck. Memento does a lot of destroying, a lot of summoning, and summons a really big monster. But unfortunately, right now the deck is flawed, at least until Infinite Forbidden. I'm actually going to put it in hardest to compete. Overall, that Valiant Smasher set is not a good box set. Centurion being in the Can Compete is what's saving the entire box right now. And while I don't think that Valmonica or Memento are bad, they could be a lot better. But if I'm keeping it a buck with you, it beats being a Valance player by a mile. Melodious. I had a lot of hype for Melodious, and I still think it is one of the better decks. One of the best things that I like about this deck is that it has Herald of Orange Light, a way to be able to negate a monster effect no matter where it is at any given time and destroy. People really do sleep on those type of effects, and I think it's just like Chimera. It's a strategy that can compete and has been showing results. I just want a little bit more statistically from this deck to follow through before we can call it one of the next best. Lightsworn in 2024 is a crime against humanity. And the reason why is because if you play Yu-Gi-Oh long enough, you still have PTSD from your opponent dropping a random Judgment Dragon in a situation you thought you had won. Now, because of the retrains, that happens. My personal experience from Lightsworn is that I've just been dogging the competition. It's crazy. But statistically, this deck is one of the hardest to compete. I almost can see the reason why a lot of people do shy away from Lightsworn. It does look like a deck that can be really strong, but its biggest flaws is that it'll never lose that stigma of being an inconsistent deck. You put that with it not being able to fully support cards like hand traps, then yeah, you could say that this deck is not the greatest. But for those players that are looking for that old school feel for Lightsworn, it's still one of the funnest decks to play. And if you ever have that Gamba going, then you might want to pick this deck up. Tenpai Dragons. You remember when I said there was a big three? Tenpai Dragons is not three. It could be two or one depending on how you look at it. Despite flopping in the beginning, Tenpai Dragon has more than recovered. It is easily one of the better strategies in the game because of its use of not only synchro summoning, but when it does get debarriered, going right back to links, summoning powerful monsters like Heretic Seal. And I've seen players even solve that going first problem by making Heretic Seal with 4 hand traps. That's still 5 disruptions. And if you play Albaz in your deck, you can fuse into a Mirror Jade for 6 disruption. Then OTK your opponent on the next turn. Monadium losing Better on the Floor and Borload Savage Dragon, players thought that this deck was completely dead. That's not the case. The deck is still incredibly good at going second in OTKing, and still has reliance on cards like Kashtira and other powerful synchro monsters when going first. I think one of the most disgusting things about this deck is that Vicious Astrolaut is not once per turn and can be made with 1 card. This strategy, I would say, odd, but works. If you know what you're doing with this deck, you're a complete menace. Go home. You are the combo king. But if you don't know what you're doing, you look like Ralph from The Simpsons. You're in danger. As hot as Salamangreat is, it has been a strategy that's been cooling off a little bit. One of the more interesting things about this deck is that Code of Soul is actually crazy. Being able to use it to link summon your Pyro Phoenix into another Pyro Phoenix, or is it Raging Phoenix? Whichever one destroyed your opponent cards. I mean, you could do both of them if you wanted to. One of Salamangreat's biggest enemies was Nibiru and Primal Being. That was fixed last set, and I even showed you an amazing deck profile regarding. And right now, Salamangreat's only big problem, I think, is player representation. It's an incredibly good deck, and I'm gonna put it in odd but works. Despite it being a 5-year-old Yu-Gi-Oh strategy, the new support for Salamangreat was crazy good. It gave the deck the ability to be able to 1-card combo. I just don't think it's a strong hand trap deck like some of the other strategies that are being played right now. Being able to recycle Ash is just complete madness though. Some people want to see Branded's downfall, but for some reason, it keeps waking up. It should really come to no surprise why I put Branded at the next best. I think players are starting to realize that it does have a win condition in the Gimmick Puppet block, but that's not normally what you're doing. Branded has a unique situation to just be able to outgrind your opponent. no Diddy. And with constant powerful fusion monsters being summoned, as well as being able to dodge hand traps, kind of like I'll be dodging my ex every time I see her at the gym, it's a ridiculous strategy that in the right hands can be successful, and has been successful. Now, a lot of players were sleeping on yugioh, but unfortunately for them, this deck is really good. This deck has been consistently topping events the last few weeks, and is solidified as a strategy that can compete. I think one of the more scarier things about yugioh is that it is getting confirmed more support. The new fusion monster is going to make this deck ridiculous with one card combos to be able to insulate itself. It's a pretty strong Yu-Gi-Oh deck that's flexible against a lot. The only thing that's not really great about Yubel is its consistency and being hand trapped from time to time. There are some hands where you're like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. And then there's a lot of hands where you're like, go. OTK me, please. Rescue Ace got a top. Rescue Ace is in a unique situation where Airlifter is at 1, and I think that's the biggest reason why this strategy fell off. It's a lot different than Snake Eyes if you play it appropriately. Anytime you can resolve Turbulence to be able to set 4 cards face down, you almost auto win the game. And even if you can't, the deck has a really good grind, as well as if you start incorporating the other Rescue Ace monsters, like Impulse, to be able to summon Fire Attacker, you can get access to some of your best cards. This is one of those strategies I'm gonna put in odd but works. Rescue Ace can be really good in the right player's hands. Now the Fire King variant of Snake Eyes has been getting consistent tops throughout the format. But if I were to advise you to play a particular Snake Eyes build, I would advise you to play either Pure, Kashtira, or Melodious. And the reason why is because the Fire King strategy isn't as powerful as it was once before. It's actually being carried by the Snake Eyes cards more than the Fire King cards help the Snake Eyes. But if we are talking about Fire King Pure, it's easily one of the hardest decks to compete. If we're talking about Fire King Snake Eyes, it's one of the next best decks, but that's simply because it's Snake Eyes. We have seen Snake Eyes decks play some of the most weirdest cards and engines in top because the strategy is so far ahead when it comes to being able to just play through anything and have amazing recovery. And here we have Rika. Rika has garnered 1 top with the new Ragnaraka cards. I think you would be incredibly foolish to count this deck out at any given time. In Europe. In America, players don't normally read, and they don't really play this card. I think it's an odd but works. It's a deck that can be pretty good in the right player's hands and has some amazing combos, but it's up to you to be able to figure them out. The best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't always the best decks in your hands. So I want you guys to let me know down below in the comment section what other type of tier list you want to see, or which strategies do you think are better on this tier list that I may give it credit. As always, you can go ahead and check out these videos so I could catch you on the next one.